This is our last of a four-part series on the Acrostic Acts, ACTS, which is just a format, which helps us to study these concepts better, these concepts that all appear in prayer throughout the scriptures. Concepts, not words. Um, so I could remind you that the word adoration doesn't necessarily appear in the Bible in the way that we understand it as English speaking people, but the concepts are there. The concepts of worship, the concepts of praise. Um, and then, so we have the word adoration, we have the word confession, we have the word thanks or thanksgiving. And then today we're going to tackle the last of the letters, the letter S. The word is supplication. Now, I read if you use the word supplication in regular conversations, you are either trying to sound spiritual, you're from the 19th century, or you're talking about prayer. And so that's a good enough place for us to settle. We are talking about prayer. I don't use the word supplication in my regular conversations. I hope you don't. Um, walk up to someone and say, how may I supplicate for you? That would sound like you're really, really pushing to sound spiritual. And we are of the Spirit of God. We are one with the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God is in us. We are in union with Christ, but no need for the overarching attempts to spiritualize everything in our lives. So, anyways, this word supplication is where we come. Um, and I just want to take the time to use a few words to sort of define what we're looking at, what we're talking about in this context. Supplication is a request. It's a request that you make to God. Um, and some of the things that come alongside with that is it requires the humility to ask. The humility to ask. It comes from a place of desperation. It's not dinner time requests or quick requests. It's a long wrestling with God. James 5:17 describes it a little with the prophet Elijah. Elijah said in James 5:17, it is said of Elijah that Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, meaning he was a fallen human being just like us. He wasn't the one who walks on water, right? Oh, he was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months, listen, it did not rain on the earth. He prayed fervently, fervently. So it's a request. It requires the humility to ask. It comes from a place of desperation, and it's fervent. It's fervent. Like I said, this is not our dinner time quick request. The quick thought came to your mind. This is something that you're in long connection to God over. Fervency. These are crucial prayers. Crucial prayers. God, turn the tide in this situation. Fill in the blank. And you pray and you go away and you come back again and you pray and you go away and you come back again and you keep coming and you keep coming and you keep coming. That's the fervency of supplication. It's not just your regular request that some thought passed your mind. This is over something that you're asking God to move in. Um, and a cool story Jesus teaches in Luke 18 about the persistent widow. Remember that? She was persistent in knocking on the door of the judge because she was hungry. She wanted to get some bread. And it says in Luke 18, verse 1, and he told him a parable to the a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. Ought always to pray and not lose heart. That's the fervency that we're talking about, is the constantly going. And the scriptures say that the judge finally decided to listen to this woman's request, because literally he said, because she keeps on coming. In the ESV it says, I think it's verse 5, it says that she keeps bothering me. She keeps bothering me. And literally in the Greek, it's the idea of she keeps coming. She won't stop knocking on my door. She won't relent. And so with all of those words, it's a request which requires the humility to ask. It comes from a place of desperation. It's not a quick request. It's something that you long wrestle with the Lord over. Elijah, again, was the example of someone fervently praying. It is something that's crucial. It's a crucial matter. God turned the tide. And you pray to God, you bring this thing before the Lord, and you go away and you come back, and you go and you come back. It's like wrestling along over someone's really, really complicated illness, or a really, really complicated relational matter, or even a really, really complicated situation of sin that someone or yourself might be entangled in. It's the prayer of constantly going to God, and not relenting. And so I want to take the time at this point to ask, is there something that you keep bothering God about? There should be things. I'm not saying, you're a bad Christian if there aren't things, but there should be things that we constantly go to God about. And then you have a life of supplication and prayer. Are there things that you keep bothering God about? My encouragement is to stay at it. Stay at it, even if it seems impossible. Like Jesus taught in Luke 18, he told him this parable about this woman, so that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. I'm telling you, if there's something that you've bothered God about over and over and over again, unless he's given you the answer already, don't lose heart. Keep at it. I want to talk a little bit about the name El Shaddai, right? The name El Shaddai, which is often translated God, my God, or Lord, in the Old Testament, right? And because I wanted to show you the nature of why do we go to God with our prayers and supplications. One of his names is El Shaddai, and El Shaddai is often translated as God, Lord, my God. But in the Greek of the Septuagint translation, this is, when I say Septuagint, it's the 70. It's the 70 translation of the Old Testament into Greek. And it's the Old Testament that might have been common use for the people of Jesus' day. So the Septuagint, which is in Greek, translates the Hebrew name of God in Psalm 91 verse 1, Shaddai, as the God of heaven. But in the Old Testament concordance, El means he who suffices, or he who is in full supply. He who is fully supplied, he who is sufficient. And so we go to God because he is the one who is able to supply the thing that we're asking for. I just wanted to make that quick note. So our supplications go up to God because he is the one who supplies. And a supplication is a request, a humble request, it made in desperation about a crucial matter that you want an answer to. And so, um, again, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going to El Shaddai, El who suffices, El who is fully supplied, El who is fully sufficient, and El who will supply your needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. Um, I wanna point out some really cool examples of supplication from the Bible. We're not going to go too deep into it, but even then, look at some of the things that we've talked about for the idea of supplication in these examples, right? These are some examples of supplication in the Bible. Moses asking to see God's glory. I believe that was coming from a place of desperation. He really, really wanted to see. He really, really wanted to see. Hannah asked for a son. She had this desperate need, this crucial need. She was experiencing barrenness, and she went to the Lord and asked for a son. David asking for the punishment of his enemies, Psalm 83. Hezekiah asking for God to prolong his life, 2 Kings 20, 1 through 3. Esther asking for deliverance of the Jews, Esther 4:15 and 16. And then Jesus for strength on the cross and power for believers. This is in John 17. What is known as the high priestly prayer of Jesus. Some would prefer that prayer in John 17 would actually be called the Lord's Prayer. But yeah, these are examples of supplication in the Bible. Moses asking to see God's glory, Exodus 33:18. Hannah asking for a son, 1 Samuel 1:11. David asking for punishment of his enemies, Psalm 83. Hezekiah and those passages I shared, Esther and those passages I shared, and Jesus for strength on the cross and for the power for believers, the unity of believers. So those are some examples where people have gone to God in a desperate way and like really, really humbly requesting for something. And so let me reiterate our thoughts so far. We supplicate humbly as the needy to the one who is in full supply or to the one who is sufficient to provide. We supplicate humbly as the needy to the one who is in full supply or to the one who is sufficient to provide. When we're humble before God, we acknowledge our sinful condition as well as God's holiness, our neediness, his ability to provide. Humble people pray with the right motives. James 4, 1 through 3. So we can pray on behalf of other people. That's called intercession. But supplication is let's say you're interceding on behalf of another person for a heavy, a desperate, crucial matter. And you keep going and you keep going and you keep going to God. Believing God's wisdom and timing because we don't presume to know or understand his overarching plan in detail. We know God's overarching plan, right? In the general, it's this, that he's going to conform you to the image of his son. But we don't know if that's going to mean suffering. We don't know if that's going to mean loss. We don't know if that's going to mean grieving, or it might mean provision. It might mean answered prayer. It might mean a peaceful time. Um, so we know God's overarching plan is to make you like his son. But the details of that plan, we can't presume to know. So when we supplicate, we're asking God for something, yet not knowing what his overarching plan is in detail. That's why we keep going and we keep going and we keep going. Supplication arms us with the strength and courage to suffer while we wait, suffer while we ask for relief. While we wait and ask for relief, we supplicate. We offer supplication, and that supplication arms us with the strength and courage to suffer. That's hard to hear. I mean, we don't like to talk about suffering. But supplication generally, because it's a long, fervent, arduous, time-consuming prayer with God, a lot of times it is because it's over something that someone is suffering. And so, if we're truly humble, and it takes a lot of humility to go before God in that manner, consistently, humbly. If we're truly humble, we will ask in faith and continue to believe even when life doesn't turn out like we had hoped. That's the truth. If we're truly humble, we will ask in faith, right? Still believing. Why? Not in that thing, not in that thing that you're praying about. Believing in God, believing in Christ. We will ask in faith and continue to believe even when life doesn't turn out like we had hoped. And so those are a few thoughts about supplication. I'm going to go to the passage that I want to focus on and just spend about 5 minutes there. Philippians 4:6. This passage, we probably all have memorized it. We probably all know different versions of it. For me, when I quote it back, I think I quote it back in a combination of the King James and New American Standard and the ESV. Like there's a combination going there. But ESV says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. Let your requests be made known to God. And I'll just start with, we'll just walk through this verse, and then we'll wrap. Philippians 4:6, do not be anxious about anything. So, Paul is telling us, no matter what it is, set your heart right before God. Set your heart right. And I don't suppose he means like work at ridding yourself of that anxiety. White knuckle your way through that. I don't think that's what Paul is saying. When he says set your heart right before, I believe that he's saying don't stay in anxiety by yourself. Lean into the Lord. So do not be anxious about anything. But in everything regarding your current context, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So don't stay in anxiety. Lean into the Lord in everything, in your current context, through prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, the attitude. Let your requests be made known to God. I want to point some things out. So don't stay in anxiety. Lean into the Lord in everything, in your current context. Pray. Paul is simply saying, pray what? Pray what? Father in heaven. Connect, speak, listen. It's a relationship. Prayer, but by prayer and supplication, And supplication, like we talked about, was a request. It was a humble request. It's also an entreaty. It's also persistence. It's also humility. It's also asking for something in a time of desperation for an answer, and constantly coming, praying about it, constantly coming back, constantly coming back. And you're entreating God. And when you entreat God and you pray and you go and you come back and you pray and you go and you come back and pray for the same thing over and over and over, what you're seeing develop there is a relationship. So supplication is a relationship building part of prayer. Prayer is the beginning of the relationship of communication, but supplication is a relationship building part of prayer because you keep going back. You know, it's like this. I knew at some point after dating and courtship that Lee was going to become my wife. I knew at some point this relationship was going to be real and there was going to be a union. Why? Every time I went back, she responded. Every time I called, she answered. And we kept calling and we kept calling and we kept going out and we kept having conversations, and the relationship was developing. And so it was building. And so supplication works in that way. We have to keep going back. So I want to simplify it like this by saying that prayer and supplication is kind of like connection and constants. Connection through prayer, constancy developed in supplication. And Paul says, and we do it with thanksgiving. We do it with thanksgiving. Our heart is often anxious. Our heart is often forgetting to be thankful, like Norm taught us 2 weeks ago. No, last week. But this is reminding us to do it with thanksgiving. Think of all the different ways that God has supplied. Think of all the different ways that God has come through. And be thankful. Focus on those. Focus on his promises. Focus on the fact that he'll never leave you nor forsake you. Focus on the fact that he's given you his spirit. Focus on the fact that you're one in him. There's so much to be thankful for. And Paul is saying, let's make sure that when we connect and we're constantly seeking God, that we do it with a heart of thanksgiving and not vengefulness, not disappointment, not doubt, but thanksgiving. So with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to who? To God, our El Shaddai. I just want to say happy Thanksgiving. I want to thank you all for tuning in. And I pray that the Lord Jesus blesses you, touches your spirit with his grace, and brings to mind all the beautiful ways that God has come through for you, brings to mind the promises of his word, and that you'd be reminded that the Spirit is present with you, that we all might have a happy Thanksgiving to God. You guys have a great week. We'll see